Welcome to Laurie's Something New with Something Old, where I use my old favorite products to create something new. This month I'm going to be watercoloring, so I'm going to start by using Altenew's small palette. This is where I'm going to put the paint as I'm mixing. I'll also be using the Persian Motifs, which is one of my favorites and one of the very first products I ever bought. Because I'm watercoloring, I'm going to be using the Watercolor 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 50% cotton cold press, their white embossing powder, and this is the 24 pan set of their watercolors. They have several different watercolor options. This one happens to be my favorite. And then I'm using 2 of their watercolor brushes, the 6 and the 1. I've recently bought their stamping wheel and I am really loving it for my stamping platform. So I'm going to be using that. And I have their little guide, see in the lower left-hand corner there, where I can line up my paper so it's directly in the center. Before I do any stamping, I'm going to be sure to use an anti-static powder. I'm going to be placing the largest flower in the upper left-hand corner. I'm just trying to get a nice balance of where I'm going to put the flowers. And then a smaller flower I'm doing in the lower right-hand corner. Then I'm going to add a few of the leaves just to scatter them around a little bit. And you can see that I'm trying to decide where I want them to be. And I don't like that. So let's move it around a little bit. And you can see that I'm leaving a place for the message or the sentiment on the left side, kind of in the lower corner. One thing I like about the stamp wheel is I've got all of my pieces, my stamps placed. When I put the stamp wheel down, it grabs all of them. And then I can, using a sticky ink for embossing, an embossing ink, I want to make sure that I ink that up very well. And then it'll just be stamping, because of the stamping wheel, all of the stamps at once. And so I can see a good layout at the time. Here I'm using, I created a chunky using a Yankee Candle top. I just decorated the inside and then put some kind of felt at the bottom. And that worked great for me. I'm going to now sprinkle the embossing powder over the card. One thing that's nice about the stamp wheel is that sticky mat that holds everything so firmly in place. I love that, especially if you're doing any ink blending. And then, of course, I heat set the embossing powder. I'm going to start by using the number 6 size brush. It's a little larger of the two. What I'm doing here is I am just taking some water in a Mystic bottle and spraying what I'm going to use to kind of wet down the paints, because they are pan paints, not in a tube, so they need to be wetted. And I'm going to be using pinks for this flower. So, and I'm going to point to which pink I'm using, which it's the 4th one from the right, if you turn it, or from the bottom. And I put a little bit of the paint onto the palette. And then I'm going to rinse my brush, at least I think I'm rinsing my brush. But let's zoom in a little bit so you can see. And I think my brush has got clean, clear water on it, and you'll notice when I start painting it's barely pink, but that's okay because I'm making all the flower pink, so that works out. And I'm very carefully making sure that I'm inside those embossed lines. One thing I like about watercoloring within embossed lines is that the embossing powder, because it's raised, holds the water in place. So it doesn't leak out, if you will, and spread. I like watercoloring a lot because the watercolor basically does the work for you if you want kind of a loose watercolor image. So I'm getting just water in here. Oh, and I got just a little bit out of the line, so I'm using a dry rag just to sop that up. And I've switched to the small brush because there's a little tiny leaf there that I want to get to. Now I'm just going to drop paint onto those wet leaves, and you can see that the paint starts spreading. And I'm putting the paint near the bottom of the flower because I'm imagining that's where the shadows would be, so the flowers would be darker in color where the shadow is. And then, as you can see, I've done the same thing with the other flower. And just let the paint flow. Now I'm going to be using kind of an aqua color for the leaves. I'm going to paint them exactly the same way. So I get out my clean, clear water and paint the leaves inside the embossing powder, or in the raised embossed image, and get that nice and saturated. And the ink only flows, the paint only flows where it's wet. So once you get the leaf wet and then you drop the paint in, it just spreads. Notice that I had to switch to the smaller brush to get into the stems of the flower. I am not good at staying within the lines when painting or coloring or any of that. So again, I like the fact that the raised embossed image keeps that paint within the lines. And pretty soon I'm going to put a little bit of the aqua color in the leaf. I want to make sure I get, nice consistency before I start dropping. I needed more water. It must have dried, so I needed more water there. And now I can just start tapping with the paint on my brush, and it just flows out. And I think it gives a kind of a loose watercolor feel. It doesn't look realistic, if you will, because I can't paint that way. I'm not that great of a watercolorist. So this way works great for me, and I do like the look. I sped it up a little bit here so you could see how I'm just adding some darkness here and there to the leaves. And I'm using the brush to kind of spread it out a little bit. Here are the leaves that were scattered around that I'm adding to. And I'm just adding more paint to where I think there might be, the leaf might be darker or in shadow. One thing about this method of watercoloring, it's really easy, it's fairly quick. I have sped it up, but it still goes fairly quickly. And I'm just finishing it up here. I've switched to the smaller brush just to give some more defined edges to the leaves. And there's my completed watercoloring. Now what I'm going to do here is I have used the die cut and cut out the larger flower, and I'm covering that up because I'm going to add splatters. And then I just took another sheet of paper that was handy there and covered up the other one. And I'm putting paint onto a acrylic block and just kind of splattering it around. You can see it there. Some are dark, some are light. I used the same green and blue paint that the flowers were painted with. I'm using Wish You a Happy Day, Wish You the Most Beautiful Day from the Beautiful Day stamp set. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to do kind of an ombre effect with the sentiment. I didn't want it just to be black. Sometimes, to me, sometimes that seems a little too harsh or too bold for such a delicate card. So I'm inking up first the top part, and you can see that sometimes I use my finger to kind of make the edge of it a little softer. And I'm just going over and over and over with the different colors. See how I just kind of take some of that ink off, and so it doesn't go completely over the other color. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to heat emboss the sentiment with clear embossing powder. So I've cleaned my stamp off really good using the sticky ink, and the stamp wheel allows me to line it up exactly because I haven't moved the stamp off the wheel. And then I stamp that with the sticky ink, and I'm going to put clear embossing powder over that. And that kind of raises the image a little bit, makes it stand out a little bit more. And then heat it, of course. What I'm showing there is that I trimmed the edges down about 1/8 of an inch all the way around, so that I could have a nice border when I put it on my card base. And you can see here that I've made 2 cards in the same way, one blue flowers and one with pink flowers. And then I found some pearls that I had to kind of accent them with. I hope this gives you some ideas of how to use the Persian Motifs stamp set. Please tune in to my channel on the 3rd Thursday of the month for the next Laurie's Something New with Something Old. If you liked this video, please give a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Thanks for joining me.